One day, they'll sit at a dinner table, maybe years from now, and someone will ask, "What was your dad like?" In that moment, I won't be there to explain myself. No PowerPoint, no metrics, just a memory floating in someone's voice. That's why I've built everything in my life. Companies, systems, ideas. But the only thing I truly hope to leave behind is a set of values strong enough that my children can build their own empires, emotionally and intellectually, without me. In this talk, I'm not here to impress you with success. I'm here to decode how a parent can program legacy, not by control, but by coding character through connection, curiosity, and courage. If you're a parent, or ever hope to be one, this isn't just a talk, it's a blueprint. Because one day, your silence will be louder than your voice, and what they remember is what you really were. When the lights go out for the last time, when the machines fall silent, and the echoes of ambition fade into the distance, what remains, for me, it's not the prototypes I built or the systems I scaled. It's something infinitely more delicate. The quiet, enduring imprint I leave on my children, not through my words, but through my patterns, what I did when no one was watching except them. I hope my kids remember how I moved through life. Not just the victories, but the approach, the way I solved problems, the way I treated others, especially in moments of stress, the way I chose logic when emotion tried to take the wheel, and the times I deliberately chose emotion because logic wasn't enough. You see, behavior becomes memory, memory becomes belief, and belief becomes identity. They watched me more than they listened to me. That's the truth. I could tell them to be honest, but if they saw me take shortcuts, those shortcuts would become their roadmap. I could tell them to be brave, but if they saw me hesitate, doubt, shrink in fear, they'd internalize that bravery is conditional, temporary, selective. I didn't want that, so I adjusted, even in my failures, and there were many. I showed them something valuable, how to fail forward, how to take feedback like data, not destruction, how to redesign a broken plan rather than abandon the mission. I hope they remember I didn't chase success for applause. I chased it for impact, and I brought them into that process. Not as spectators, but as students. I showed them how problems become puzzles, how frustration becomes fuel, how relentless iteration becomes innovation. But beyond the work, beyond the grind, I hope they remember the tone I used when I was tired. I hope they recall how I apologized when I got it wrong, that I didn't let ego write the story, that I wasn't too big to be small in the moments that mattered, because that's the real programming. The world might judge me on outcomes. My kids will judge me on presence. Did I stop when they needed me? Did I hear them without interrupting? Did I make them feel like their ideas mattered, even when they were still forming them? I want them to remember that I made time for curiosity, that I asked questions, not just gave answers, that I let them explore, even if I already knew the conclusion, because legacy isn't about control, it's about empowerment. I wasn't trying to make clones of myself. I was trying to raise original thinkers. I was trying to build humans who could think critically, love deeply, and act with integrity, even when the algorithm says otherwise. And when I'm gone, I hope they remember one thing more than any other, that their dad lived what he believed. Not perfectly, but persistently, consistently, that every day I got up with a mission, to make the world better and to make them stronger, that I built systems that mattered, but never at the expense of being the system they could rely on. So if they remember me, let it be through their own courage, their own kindness, their own clarity, because if they live boldly, kindly, and wisely, then I'm not really gone. I'm just running in their code. Risk is often misunderstood. To the outside world, it looks reckless, like stepping into the fire just to prove you can. But to those who really understand it, risk is a responsibility. It's how you meet your potential halfway. I took risks, a lot of them. Some worked, some didn't. But if my kids remember anything about my relationship with risk, I want them to remember why I did it. Not for ego, not to win headlines or stack zeros in a bank account. I took risks because I believed in building something bigger than myself, because I believed the world doesn't change by people playing it safe, and because I wanted them to understand that safety, when overvalued, becomes a prison. I never wanted to teach them to be comfortable. I wanted to teach them to be courageous. That means saying yes to uncertainty. That means showing up when the odds aren't perfect. That means launching even when you're not 100% ready, because waiting for perfection is just another form of fear. When they watched me fail, and they did, I hope they didn't just see the collapse. I hope they saw the rebuilding, the recalibrating, the getting back up, stronger and smarter. That's the real value of risk, not just the reward, but the resilience. I hope they remember the look in my eyes when I was up against the wall and still chose to move forward, not because I was fearless. I wasn't. I was scared, but I moved anyway. That's the lesson. Fear isn't the enemy, stagnation is. I made choices that confused people, choices that seemed irrational on spreadsheets, but purpose doesn't always fit into a formula. It's a deep internal pull, an instinct that guides action when logic stalls. I want my kids to understand that logic and instinct can coexist, that purpose can be calculated and still full of passion. I hope they remember the times I walked away from comfort because it no longer aligned with my mission. I want them to learn that just because something is working doesn't mean it's worth it. That alignment with your values will always be more important than applause from the crowd. When they face their own moments of decision, I hope they recall my example, not to copy it, but to be reminded that calculated risk is a language spoken by those who change things. I didn't take every risk, just the ones that mattered. I didn't chase attention, I chased transformation, and when it got hard, and people called me crazy, and the plan nearly fell apart, I stayed with it, because I wasn't building for approval, I was building for them. For the future, for the possibility that they'd grow up in a world just a little better than the one I inherited. That's what I want them to remember. That risk, when powered by purpose, is one of the purest forms of love. It's saying, I will go first. I will stand in the unknown. I will break through so you don't have to. And if one day they're faced with a choice to stay where it's safe or step toward what matters, I hope they remember me standing at the edge, not hesitating, not apologizing, just trusting that purpose is always worth it. Because real legacy isn't left behind, it's handed forward. When I'm gone, I don't want my children to remember the gifts I gave them, not the gadgets, the holidays, the toys, or the surprise packages that lit up birthdays and holidays. I want them to remember me present, not perfect, there, aware, human, because in the end, it's not what you give that leaves a lasting impact. It's how deeply you showed up in the moments that didn't demand celebration, but required attention. Presence is underrated in today's world. We've built a society addicted to stimulation, screens, speed, updates, applause. But in that race, something fragile and precious often gets lost. Focus. I wasn't always good at it. I've spent entire days solving problems no one could see, trying to launch what felt like impossible futures. And during that time, my mind lived in two universes, the one I was building and the one I was already in. But it hit me hard that the most revolutionary thing I could do for my children wasn't to give them things. It was to give them time, undivided, uninterrupted, unconditional. I want them to remember the nights we talked about space and dreams, not just stars and science. The walks where they asked ridiculous questions and I treated them with serious answers, the bedtime stories I didn't rush, the dinner table debates I didn't tune out of, the days when they were hurting and I didn't try to fix them. I just sat with them so they knew they weren't alone. That is presence, that is power. I hope they remember that when I looked at them, I really looked, that I didn't just nod while my phone vibrated, that I wasn't just physically in the room. I was mentally, emotionally, and spiritually there. Available. I hope they remember that when they spoke, I paused. I didn't talk over them. I didn't minimize their thoughts. I made space, because attention, in its rawest form, is love. I also want them to remember the days I unplugged not for escape, but for connection. That I shut down systems so I could tune into them, that they were never a distraction from my purpose. They were my purpose. Presence isn't dramatic. It doesn't make headlines. It won't be found on a resume. But it imprints in the psyche. It tells a child, you matter, you're worth my time, you're worth my full self. And over the years, those small, quiet signals accumulate. They create a sense of safety, of worthiness, of belonging that no gift could ever replace. I didn't want my children to grow up wondering if I was proud of them. I wanted them to feel it in real time, in my tone, in my patience, in my laughter when their jokes made no sense but made perfect memories. I know I won't be here forever, but I hope when they close their eyes and try to remember me, they don't just see my face. They feel my presence. Because the real legacy I leave isn't material, it's relational, it's emotional, it's the sense that their dad wasn't a myth, a machine, or a man always running towards something else, but a human being who chose, over and over, to show up for them. And if they grow into adults who show up for others the same way, I'll know I did something right. That kind of presence echoes longer than anything money can buy. We live in a world wired for shortcuts. One tap and food arrives, one click and questions are answered. But real life doesn't operate on shortcuts. It runs on systems. On solving, not escaping. On confronting, not scrolling past. When I'm gone, I don't want my kids to remember a father who had all the answers. I want them to remember a father who wasn't afraid to face hard questions. Because life is problems, beautiful, layered, difficult problems, and what determines the quality of your life isn't how few problems you have, it's how well you learn to solve them. When I encountered resistance, technical, emotional, human, I didn't flinch. I dissected it, I mapped it. I looked for angles no one else had the patience to look for. Not to win, but to understand, and I want my children to remember that mindset. I didn't run from breakdowns. I reverse engineered them. I didn't teach them to avoid mistakes. I taught them to mine them for intelligence, because that's where wisdom lies, in the data you gather from failing forward. When something broke at home, whether it was tech, relationships, or even just a plan, we didn't hide from it. We analyzed, we asked, what's the root cause? That simple question can save years of confusion, not just in science, but in love, in self-awareness, in leadership. I hope they remember that every meltdown, every misunderstanding, every misstep had a post-mortem. Not blame, just analysis. What did we learn? What would we do differently? What variable were we blind to? That's the problem-solving mindset, and it applies to everything. I never wanted to raise perfectionists. I wanted to raise pattern detectors, people who don't just react, but respond with curiosity. People who see a mess and say, let's map it. Who see a failure and say, there's something we didn't understand yet. This world doesn't need more people who panic under pressure. It needs more calm thinkers, more engineers of emotion, more humans who understand that everything, from your mental health to your relationships to your work, is a system, and systems can be understood, upgraded, improved. When my kids are older, they'll face challenges I can't predict. They'll have heartbreaks I can't prevent. They'll make mistakes I won't be around to help clean up. But if they remember how I approached complexity, with method, with humility, with fierce clarity, they'll know what to do, not because I gave them answers, but because I taught them how to ask better questions. That's the legacy I care about. Let them remember the whiteboards covered in chaos that slowly formed into clarity. Let them remember how I scribbled late at night, not because I was obsessed with work, but because I believed every problem had a door if you were willing to look long enough. Let them remember how I paused before reacting, how I always asked why 5 times before making a judgment. I want them to internalize that mind, set not just as a strategy, but as an identity. They don't need to be geniuses. They need to be relentless observers. They don't need to have solutions instantly. They just need to not stop looking, because the world bends to those who refuse to look away from its chaos. And if they carry that forward, if they build lives rooted in clarity, driven by understanding, and powered by curiosity, then even in my absence, I'll still be there, not as a memory, but as a mental framework. As the quiet voice that says, don't avoid it, solve it. There's a myth that to lead, to be strong, to parent well, you have to always be right, always in control, always one step ahead. That's false. And honestly, dangerous. I never wanted my kids to believe their father was flawless. I wanted them to know he was real, because realness outlives reputation. Vulnerability beats perfection, and authenticity, raw, honest, sometimes uncomfortable, is the foundation of trust. When I'm gone, I don't want them to remember a man who always had the right answers. I want them to remember someone who wasn't afraid to say, I don't know. Someone who paused, questioned himself, admitted when he missed the mark, and was strong enough to say, I'm sorry. Because that's real strength, being open about the fact that you don't always get it right. There were days I made poor decisions, took stress out in the wrong tone, chose work when I should have chosen connection, reacted faster than I thought. But I circled back, always. I owned my actions. I let them see the recalibration. That matters, because kids don't just need a model of excellence. They need a model of repair. When things broke in our relationship, I didn't sweep it under the rug. I talked, I explained, I invited feedback even when it stung. I didn't hide behind the because I said so shield. I welcomed challenge, because in that space, something beautiful happens, respect grows. You teach them that love doesn't require perfection. It requires presence, humility, and consistent growth. I hope my children remember that being wrong wasn't something I feared. It was something I valued. Every mistake was data. Every argument was a chance to learn, not just to win. I wasn't interested in raising kids who feared failure or idolized authority. I was interested in raising thinkers, builders, humans who could look in the mirror and say, here's what I missed, and here's what I'll do better. I modeled that first. I want them to recall the moments I said, I hear you, even when I disagreed. The times I adjusted course, not to please them, but because they made a better point, because that shows them that logic matters more than ego. Too many kids grow up seeing their parents as untouchable. I never wanted that. I wanted to be touchable, reachable, human, because when they remember that I wasn't always right, they'll also remember that they don't have to be either, that they can mess up, fix it, learn, grow, and still be worthy. Still be leaders, still be loved. That's the freedom I wanted to give them, not the illusion of perfection, but the truth of being enough even when evolving. And maybe, just maybe, one day when they're faced with a tough moment, with their own kids, their teams, their friends, they'll pause. They'll soften, they'll say, I was wrong, and I'm ready to fix it. In that moment, I'll still be here, not in body, but in blueprint. They'll hear my voice not as a lecture, but as a reminder, be real. Be honest, be human, and remember, people don't follow perfect people, they follow real ones, because being right wins arguments, but being real, that wins hearts. If I had to strip everything down, all the innovation, the relentless push, the late nights, the sacrifices, the systems, the strategy, and leave only one thing behind for my kids to remember, it would be this. Love was the code running in the background of every single thing I ever did. Not the soft, decorative kind of love you put in greeting cards. I'm talking about the kind of love that builds, that corrects, that questions, that sacrifices, that stretches and breaks and rebuilds when it has to. The kind that doesn't always feel warm, but is always working for your highest good. I want my kids to know that every upgrade in my life, every personal version 2.0, 3.0, 4, 5, was powered not by ambition alone, but by love. The desire to build a better world for them, a better future, a stronger foundation, a model of what it looks like to build under pressure without losing your soul in the process. They may not have always understood my decisions in the moment. Maybe they even felt hurt by them sometimes. Maybe they thought I worked too much, pushed too hard, held them to standards that seemed intense. But if they look closer, if they trace the logic beneath the pressure, they'll find something gentle, powerful, and consistent at its core, love. When I said no, it was love. When I stayed up past exhaustion to finish something I believed in, it was love. When I pulled them into tough conversations instead of shielding them, it was love. Not because I wanted control, but because I wanted them prepared. I wanted to show them what it looks like to build with heart. In a world that measures everything in performance, metrics, and speed, I want them to remember that love isn't the thing that slows you down. It's the thing that drives you forward. It's the one variable that makes all the others worth calculating. Every system I've ever built, whether in code or in character, was made to last. But nothing lasts if love isn't part of the design. And love, in this case, meant paying attention to their moods, to their fears, to the little wins that didn't look like much on the surface but meant everything in context. Love meant challenging them when they wanted ease. It meant forgiving them faster than they forgave themselves. It meant never withholding belief, even when they doubted their own voice. I hope they remember that I didn't just love them because they were my children. I loved them as individuals. I watched them, learned them, adjusted to them, adapted for them. Because real love evolves. It doesn't just say, you're mine. It says, I'm willing to grow so I can meet you better every year. And when I'm no longer here, when the lights dim and the noise fades, I don't want them to hold onto the projects I launched, the buildings with my name on them, or even the ideas I left behind. I want them to hold onto the feeling. That steady, unwavering signal that hummed underneath it all. That signal that said, no matter how high I reached, you were the reason I climbed. No matter what I built, you were the blueprint that mattered most. And no matter how far I went, I never left you behind. Because in the end, love wasn't just a feature. It was the operating system.